Hello, champion. Thank you for dropping by. If you don't know me yet, I'm your shrinking Basco, a psychologist on a mission to discover trauma from a multidisciplinary and multicultural perspective. And today we're talking with Francesco Fassina, a landscape regenerative design landscapist and a water conservation consultant. And the reason why we're talking to him is that Francesco has gone through an amazing counter-cultural experience or journey, and he really is, in his very humble way, a leader for all of us in terms of what is possible, but also in terms of what we should be thinking about. He came from a typical middle-class, well-educated family and was very much set on a path to climb up the ladder of middle-class incomes when he decided to go completely in the other direction and to climb back down, to work with his hands and on the land, to become someone who put into practice the knowledge that he had learned. It's an inspiring story that will be told side by side many other stories about the globe and how the earth works and how we're all affected. But the biggest link that I wanted to make here, and probably the one that is most resonant with this channel, is the link between these macro level processes of hurt and pain across the globe to our personal stories. And I really would like you to help me create a stronger link between these macro level changes towards urbanization and technologizations and the loss of mental, emotional, and relational health that so many of us are experiencing, and that I, as a practitioner in the field of psychology and counseling, often, if not all the time, come across with my clients. Your comments, your sharings, your stories will just make everything that we have tried to put into this interview that much stronger. And we really need your help with this one, because it's just the subject that, and the connection that gets talked the least, the one that is most obvious, but also so obvious that it becomes ephemeral and that we become blind to. And so therefore something that is quite difficult to pin down. So watch until the end and share your stories, and let's get into it.
Hello guys, welcome to another All About Trauma episode. And on this episode, we are actually going to be talking to Francesco Fassina. He is a regenerative landscape designer, water cycle restoration practitioner, and consultant based in Uruguay. Now, today we are going to talk about the biggest trauma of all, the wound we humans are inflicting on all systems on the earth. We are going to ask what this trauma is, where it originates, how it manifests physically, why it plays into our personal traumatic experiences without us realizing, and of course, perhaps where a glimpse of hope lives. So I'm very excited about this particular conversation. Nicolas, how are you feeling about our guest and this topic?
Very excited. I reconnected with an old friend from university. On my second master, I did in environmental science. Francesco Fassina, nice to see you here. We're so happy to have you. It's been a while since we have been trying to bring you on the show. I know you will tell us a bit later what you have been busy with. But today I'm excited because we'll be making quite a special link that I think very few academics or people that I know could make, the link between personal stories of trauma and the widest, as René just anticipated, the widest, biggest story of trauma that we inflict on the earth. So yeah, welcome to the show, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from you.
Nicolas, hi René. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really happy to reconnect with you after those years. So I'm really inspired by your work that you're doing. So I'm really happy to share something with you guys.
Just to also honor our relationship, this might be the first and last time that we have a chance to kind of sort of roll the carpet on how we met and where we were in our lives at that time. I think the way in which this sets the background for where you are in your life today is also very interesting. So, would you mind giving us a little bit, a sort of a background of where we were in our lives when we met back in 2013? I think it was. Why were you studying what you were studying, and what was the content of this master, and how it inspired you to move forward into your life?
I would say that those years that we shared, Nicolas, were really really rich of learnings, not only academic, but also like human relationship. For me, I remember those years as really defining as well who I am today. In those years, I could understand what was important for me. I could like set like the foundation of my values that I held today. I remember amazing conversation sharing with you and with other people. Like those years are really like helped me really like structuring, my thinking, my worldview. So we're like really, really rich. And I think today we are trying to pick a little bit of what we learned and how that knowledge evolved or deepened in ourselves and in our experience.
I remember the master was called the Human Ecology, Power, Culture, and Sustainability. Maybe not everybody is aware of what human ecology is. Maybe you want to give us a little bit of information of what that means. Why power? Why culture?
Um, Human ecology is an inherent multidisciplinary field of study, which aims to study human environmental relationship, but from a social science point of view. So it's not about studying ecology in the like natural science term. It's looking at how humans, from a different lenses, there was a lot of anthropology, or at least I delved a lot into anthropology. So how different human cultures related to nature, and how this relationship was based on worldview, and how this worldview actually shaped actions and materiality. So it's basically the study of human environmental relationship through history, through different culture, in order to understand what is going on. Or at least that was the meaning that I wanted to follow and to investigate is, okay, why do we behave in the way we do? Why and how our civilization, let's call it like industrial and contemporary civilization, why do we relate the way we do? Why do we witness, all this problem that we have in front of us, that we call climate change, that we call, ecosystem deterioration, pollution, there are different names, the things that we observe, and we know that these are the result of the way we behave and we live and we inhabit. So human ecology looked a lot into this, try to understand why we behave in certain way, and what can we do to change. So it was really like an interdisciplinary field of studies, and I mean, I find it really, really inspiring, because every one of us could follow and choose, the lens from which to investigate this field. Personally, I delved a lot into anthropology, into environmental philosophy, in order to understand if we behave in such a way, what's the connection with the way we think about the world? What's the relationship within our perception, our idea of who we are? What's the role of humans? What is life? What is the world? What's the story? And what's the relation between all these ideas and greater questions with the way we decide to live and inhabit and build, and have an impact. So that was my not my entry point, but the pathway that I found that was really interesting for me. Then I, for example, my master thesis, at the end of these 3 years, I decided to look at education. So I made an analysis of Western worldview, dominant Western worldview. So the way Western culture and civilization look at the world, what's the story of this worldview, and analyze this worldview and identify some core beliefs and ideas, that are actually myth and stories like every human culture has. Western culture, sometimes we forget because we think that Western culture is objective, there is no myth, no story anymore, everything is objective. Actually, this is not true. Every human culture holds its own stories and to give meaning to this is as ancient as the human being on the planet, the need of making stories of the world. And so I look at those ideas, deep ideas and core beliefs of the Western culture, and trying to analyze it and make an argument that those beliefs were and are still at the root of our environmental degrading behavior. Most of the time we don't want to do any harm to the planet, but we do anyway. And there is this gap that we are not conscious of the way we think and the way we relate, and we just relate in a certain way because we learn to do this way. We learn that in order to sustain human lives and human society, we need to control and take resources, and all of this. So
all our cultures, all civilizations are guided by certain core assumptions about where the universe comes from, for example. How was the world born? What is the purpose of life on the earth? What is the purpose of life for human beings, and what is the purpose of life with all other creatures? Is the purpose of life of a beetle the same as for a human being, right? We make all these differentiations, right? And it's so true that dominant cultures become blind to their own stories. It's kind of funny, isn't it? It's like the dominant culture has the biggest story of all, and yet all dominant cultures from all parts of the world across history always became blind to themselves. And so, in a way, as we mentioned this, I'm wondering if we should mention some of the characteristics of the Western story, because I think a lot of people are not aware of the story that they're embedded in and living by. Like, for example, why do we travel 2 hours to go to work? Why is that a choice that we should even consider? And we would probably come back to your choices, Francesco, to highlight how unimaginably nonsensical these choices are, right? To you today. But to the average person who lives in a city, that's normal.
I mean, these core beliefs held within Western culture, are these like deep-rooted philosophical ideas that, as you mentioned, that we are most of the time not even conscious about. For example, one of the most central is what we call anthropocentrism, is that, like human beings as a species are the result of natural selection and evolution through geological times, how life evolved on the planet. And we somehow are different from the rest of life. We are self-conscious, and we don't recognize self-consciousness in other living beings. We have rationality, so we can know the world, we can control, we can separate, categorize, we can know really the world, and we have a choice, something that we don't recognize in other animals. So we recognize that humans are different, and anthropocentrism is based on giving values on this difference. So we are different, and we are somehow superior because we can differentiate ourselves and we can control and we can understand, and we can plan, and we can talk about the future, and we can, we have this capacity that we don't see in other living beings. So anthropocentrism is putting human beings somehow in a higher position, saying that we are more intelligent, we are different, we are, able to, and we have the right to.
We are moral.
Yeah.
There's no morality in animals, for example.
Correctly, and somehow anthropocentrism holds that we have the right to maintain this position, which is given from God, from Mother Earth, from, causality of chemistry and physics, it depends on from where you, but somehow, humans are different, separate, and superior. This is basically anthropocentrism. And this is a held behavior that is not questioned within, Western culture. Another idea that is really ingrained in Western worldview is, for example, the idea of individualism. That, humans, the basic social unit of human society is the individual. Every individual is, unique. Every individual is different. Every individual has individual rights, So we divided humanity as the sum of individualities. And our culture is built around individualities, Like, you are different from me. You could have different values from me. You could have different needs from me. You could find different means of sustain yourself from me. You could, give importance to others. Like, we are completely different beings. Me and you, me and René, like, this is individualism. It's dividing humanity from a social point of view into individual beings separated from itself. Then we need to, collaborate because we live in society, but the basic social unit is the individual. Another idea is the idea of progress, for example, which is completely taken for granted that, humanity's pathway on the earth needs to progress and getting better and better. So we don't question this. The idea of progress is really, really Western idea, because we know from past civilization, from other culture that still lives today, that they don't have this idea of we need to progress somehow. We need to climb the stairs, you need to getting better, like to constantly change things. This idea of linearity, is as well part of the Western culture. So, and this idea of progress for example, allowed, the dominant culture to, categorize human population and human societies on the planet and say, okay, these countries are more developed than others, rich and poor. And so we put values again. So it's really heavily value-based, our worldview, right and wrong, and this is typical of the Western, you, Nicolas, had life experience, living in the East part and contact with Eastern cultures. And, Western culture is really dualistic, like right and wrong, black and white, good or bad, developed, underdeveloped. So all of these ideas are part of the way Western society look at the world. And somehow those ideas, unconscious or conscious, inspire the way we relate, to the world. Yeah. So
that's just to make the point to our viewers, and I'd love to know what you think, guys. Comment below. That is the connection between this broader aspect of thinking, connecting for you at the level of your own personal stories, these unconscious assumptions that we make about life, relating, individualism, progress. Is this something that you think is intersecting with the choices that you're making today about what is valuable and what is not valuable in your life, like the kind of jobs that you think are valuable, the kind of people that you think are valuable, the kind of things that you value about yourself. Are you enough? Are you ever enough in this society that continues to push you to grow and change and buy more things to be enough, right? Can you be enough? If you're not enough, question this and leave comments there to let us know how is that working for you, right? So here we make, Francesco, the first link between these broad assumptions and the individual story, because our broad assumptions guide our actions, as you mentioned, right?
I just curious to understand, like you said, Nicolas has experienced, the Eastern cultures, and just to know what made you feel maybe unfulfilled as you are studying this, as you are getting to know these philosophies. And even it's great how Nicolas has mentioned, are you enough? Was the philosophies enough? Was the understanding the individualism that has worked for hundreds of years for in the Western world? How was your experience with that? And what made you maybe detach from that and now go to where right now you're based in? What was the driving force, and maybe the friction that happened, that you decided this space and the environment that this has been taking place in isn't working really well for yourself as an individual, and you decided to move? Maybe that breaking point.
Yeah, maybe, of course, being aware of how what I was doing, the choices that I was making, So I started to link, okay, what I've done so far, like how, was I conscious or not, all of this, how of this meta structure of beliefs, it was like a kind of, it wasn't a sudden revelation, but it was kind of, like taking awareness of me as a part of a belief system, that I wasn't this separate individual, with all my ideas in my brain, like, no, what I was as well the result of the culture that was embedded, So this, yeah, for me, it was like starting this, reflection of uh, uh, understanding these ideas, and how not only me as an individual, but as a society, as a group of people, that was sharing with, how those beliefs were acting in ourselves, in the choices that we were making. And then, of course, realizing, the need of integrating other ideas and values. So it was not criticizing, okay, we shouldn't have values, these values are wrong and we have to take them out, and no values. Because, as we said, we as a species have this characteristic. We have, like beings of stories, we are like social beings, and we always needed, from the dawn of time, stories in order to make sense of the world. So this is really like ancestral. This is what physics does. This was like philosophy does. So it's always trying to give meaning, and I mean, opening a parenthesis, I'm really fascinated by how, science is nowadays merging and integrating, with Eastern philosophy, or, indigenous worldviews, something that has been written and said for millennia. Now, new science is opening, to this integration, So I think this is, really inspiring and hopeful in this way. But, like the Western civilization behaves in a certain way. We have this environmental impact in front of us that don't seem to diminish. Actually, I think every year it's getting worse, even if awareness is growing, apparently. So for me, this led me, to being aware of this idea, being aware of who I was, what I was doing, and then understanding that changing ideas intellectually and like moving from anthropocentrism to ecocentrism, for example, these ideas that put like life at the center, whole life, and seeing human life as an expression of a whole, which is life. Changing the idea was for sure important, but wasn't enough in order to change behavior, So then when I started realizing that in order to embody these new ideas, these new stories, this wasn't just an intellectual exercise, something that I could study, something that I could write about, Of course, it could be helpful and necessary, but certainly for me, for my point of perception, certainly not enough. And then when I started to understand that my way was leading me to, like starting in practice, to live differently, so learning from experience and embodying these ideas through practical action, not just talking about them. This sense of being uncomfortable at some point of my academic journey that I shared with you, Nicolas, was realizing this, that I was missing. We were talking a lot about these things, about these ideas. We were talking a lot about the need to change, but we weren't doing nothing, actually. We were just talking. We were really, really good at talking about changing, the need for change, analyzing, criticizing, investigating, writing about, making arguments. But in practicality, we were just following the same, pathway, way of living, just, studying about this. So I felt something was missing. And the first missing piece was taking responsibility of my life first. And I think that from that point, a new journey started, a new journey that didn't regret the past, just, a new step that integrated what I was doing so far, all this new knowledge, all this, shared with you, during the academic years. But the new step for me was awaiting for me. And then, 10 years later, here I am talking to you.
Uruguay.
It actually sounds very insightful from as you're sharing all this on, number one, understanding how to be practical with all this, how to really apply what you know. And it reminds me, Nicolas, of what we've been talking about so far, whereby in another episode, we got to talk about how the connection with nature and the environment, whereby the Western philosophy is trying to tame it and maybe control it and study it. But where I'm from, Kenya and the African continent, of course, very Eastern, is we feel like nature is an extension of ourselves. So applying it is almost a no-brainer instead of studying it. I think I can't even remember in my people, like the lower people, my great-grandfather was a very good farmer of cattle. And I don't think he ever read a book about it. He just got to do it, got to interact with it, got to know how to deal with nature practically. So it really gets to remind me and gets to help me understand the validity of sometimes when you've gone through all the process of studying and just connecting, you just need to apply it and get to the work. And I'm just very curious to how Francesco will tell us about his experience so far.
Yeah, and also, Francesco, I think there was a little story that you wanted to share out of an environmental change that happened in your hometown back in Italy, in Genoa, if I remember well, and how that somehow changed the way that you related to your neighbors or something like that. We might want to bring that story up because, again, we want to make the links between these macro dynamics, these micro forces, and then the personal sphere of the self. Because how we construct the self is also a story. I am a psychologist. I am blonde and Western. I'm wealthy. I'm not wealthy. I'm healthy. I'm not healthy. I'm worthy of love. I'm not worthy of love. I'm disciplined. I'm not disciplined. I'm a drug addict. Whatever it is, it's always a story. And there are certain spiritual traditions out there, for example, that make it their point to strip you of everything that you say after the word I. They practice all sorts of rituals and sort of, yeah, they have their own methodologies and methods to get you to be naked just with the I there, and they get a sense of the I. What is this I that you're saying, right? They want you to see this I, to feel this I. Do we ever rest enough on the sense of the I to to know what we mean by that? We don't, right? So everything that comes after the I is an addition, is a story, right? And it's a story about the world and how you interact with it. So I want to come back to this story that you were telling in Italy. What happened there? I don't know the story. I'm curious to know.
Yeah, it's a really like simple story, is it? And I think it's all the simple stories carry like some meaning for the person that lived them. But this story came to my mind as a memory, and thinking about something that we shared previously of this conversation. Also, how like changes, in relationship to nature actually then had some effect later on, among people in the actions and the behavior. So this simple story was that I used to go with my family every summer to a house in the mountain, in the countryside, like a couple of hours from Genova, where I'm from. So that was our trip to nature, the house in the countryside for us, that I was born and I grew up in a city. So for us as a children was going to nature. And I remember that when I was a kid, beside our house was just fields, just fields. And I have a deep connection to that place. And because my mom used to go every summer when she was a child as well. So we had 3 generations going to the same place. So we have this a strong connection as a family to that place. And so I remember that when I was a kid, beside and all around there was just fields. And there were like some houses, our neighbors, and other families and other kids with whom we used to play all the day during 3 months, every day, like summer vacation. And we used to explore those surroundings, those natural surroundings, animals grazing free, big stones to climb, trees, no fences, like this idea was so natural for us. Okay, we have those houses in those sector, and then all around is nature for us, And my best memories of those years are connected to those games and playing in these fields and go walking, and discovering little things, insects and stuff, like kids playing, like in nature. So the most natural thing. Then something started to change. I can't remember actually when. Probably I was maybe 12 years old or something. So all those surroundings started to be developed, was like space available for house development, So, and suddenly in a few years, in 2-3 years, maybe 30 houses were built. So we passed from being like 4 or 5 houses together, the first ones that my grandparent made to build. He didn't build himself, but he contracted a builder. So in the 50s of last century, and then at the beginning of the 2000s, like a huge part of those surroundings, those natural surroundings, were started to being developed in 3 years, like a lot of construction, roads, paved, everything, you know. I remember this big rock, this huge, not huge, but for us as a kid, were like big rock. You used to climb. This was our base, you know. That was our connection point. We went there hiding from our parents, you know. There was our spot where we were free. Nobody could see us, you know. This everything was developed well. Everything was enclosed between fences. Everything was sold. So the result of this, what I would like to try with this story, is that because of this, I lost completely the relationship with those friends. They were my neighbors. And I saw in just a few years, like from playing every day for, you know, 2 months with those kids, losing the relationship. And in a you know, few years, like maybe 4 or 5 years later, we barely said hi. We lost that space and we lost the relationship. And I don't think, I mean, I wouldn't call this like a traumatic experience at all, but I held this memory so strong, you know, something so strong that happened, you know, those beautiful years playing, and then something changed. Not only I lost the landscape, the natural landscape around, but I lost those relationships. It was so awkward when I was a little bit more, you know, like in I was maybe, you know, 13, 14, 15 year, like growing as, you know, a young boy, and don't even, you know, say hi to the people that were like super close friends when we were kid, you know. Of course, when you grow up, you lose a little bit of spontaneity, you know, as well. But it was so clear how the change in land use, you know, I lost relationship. So this for me was a really powerful experience that always is with me, you know, when I think about how the landscape is changing, you know, not only in those little village in the mountain, you know, like everywhere, more in cities, way more, you know, like urbanization, gentrification, you know, like how land use change, you know, how this has an impact on people in our civilization. No, land is an asset, land is property. So if you don't receive a rent, yeah, it's like you are losing money, or, you know, you're just wasting this possibility of progress, of, you know, getting more money. And so suddenly, you know, everything was developed, paved, you know, a lot of cars. We couldn't play in the street anymore, you know, because suddenly like hundreds of cars were moving. Probably 50 families moved in, you know, we were 5 families, and then we were 60 in just, you know, few years. So everything changed, and then we were in the city again, you know, like not the city, but, you know, we needed to behave a little bit like more consciously. Cars, you know, strangers, you know.
I really get the sense that in that period, there was an uncertainty about the meaning that this place had for both you and the other kids and the families and their respective families. And so because of the threat in meaning, then you guys didn't know how your relationship would evolve and continue, right? Because are we telling the same story still or not? You know, what is the story that my family and I need to follow now? Is this a place that we like or don't like anymore? We have been here since the generation of my grandparents, but maybe that doesn't interest us anymore. And you don't know what the other family is going through in terms of how their story is changing in relation to that landscape. And so suddenly this relational story, which is a combination of both stories, is becoming threatened and disrupted, right?
Yeah, totally. You framed it in really, really precise way. And I could see the same pattern happening with my mother and my father, that used to go to the head house for decades, you know. They started like lose relationship with the neighbors that they already knew for generation, you know. So something happened in this like social relationship, that like we were no longer so close as we were before. Like before it was so different from the city, and then that place started looking more like a city, and then our relationship changed in the way we relate in the city. That you live in a building with 20 apartments, and you don't know the person that live above you or below you. And
Yeah,
so
exactly. The anonymity, and so the sharing, for example, you might have shared meals before all this happened, right? You brought each other whatever preserves you made, or some things that you got from the vegetable garden or something. And when you have apartments, that loses complete meaning. And the you know first of all, people also get wealthier when they sell land, so they don't really need to exchange goods anymore. But also the social judgments that we make in cities, we're always so worried about how we appear, if our Italian is perfect or not, and if I've bought the latest gadget, and what car we're driving, and so on. So the kind of judgments we also operate with, again, the stories that we need to tell about ourselves and others are very different from a sort of a rural landscape, right? Um, Reminds me of this story. There's a beautiful documentary that I saw when I was 17 or so or something, about a dam that was built in Italy, um, around the Alps, in the area of the Alps. And so there was a lake that was kind of quite high on the hills, and there was a lake, and it was dammed. And when and the population that lived around the lake were mostly fishermen. They fished in the lake, and then there were populations of little villages, or families that lived on herding the sheep. So a bit further up, right, 500, 600 meters higher than the lake, there were the sheep herders, and then below there were the fishermen. And so these fishermen had very strong ties to the herdsmen, right? They gave fish, the herdsmen give milk, for example, right? The herdsmen gave wool, and they gave, I don't know, rope, or other things that I don't really know of, but in detail. But what happened is that when they dammed up the lake, the water flooded the towns of the fishermen. So not only all the fishermen towns had to evacuate, but the whole cultural, relational landscape of the people that were not directly affected by the landscape were so affected by the relational changes that their society also began to collapse. Their culture began to collapse because suddenly they didn't have all the sustenance product that they were deriving from the lake and around the region around the lake. This sort of cascading effect is very interesting.
this was what happens a lot in the name of progress and development, changes in the landscape brought by infrastructure building, that are set in place and promoted as, the solution to problems, creating new jobs, like progress. The effect of this is, we see it all around the world, is like not only environmental impact, some cases like more extreme than others, but also this social disruption of culture, which is in this value-based thinking that we have as a culture, is put like in second place. First is economic progress.
Much further down.
Yeah. Yeah, like we have to sacrifice fisherman culture, this is a perfect spot for a dam. We can produce like tons of energy, to run.
I think it was the Fiat industry that needed a lot of energy and had
Yeah.
scouted this place.
So we, in name of, development, we lost, and we are keep losing a lot of, this human fabric, this way of living that were actually more permanent. We are losing way of being within the Western world, but for sure more and more outside of the Western world, way of being which could, which were like an example of other ways that could be possible, other possibilities, other, not only the human and cultural diversity, but, in this homogenization of, the Western civilization, which is bringing, the solution for everybody, this global progress is actually erasing the alternative, because when we try to look at the root cause of all of this, I think that, we are not facing any technical problems or technological problems, or energy problem, nothing like this. What we need is another way of perceiving and thinking about, and by eliminating and sacrificing in the name of progress, other way of being, other cultures, we are actually losing the cultural base from which to draw alternatives, like I remember Vandana Shiva talking about monocultures of the mind, the effect of globalization in education, in economic development, in all the material way of living which is exported all around the world. We are actually losing other way of thinking, other way of addressing problem and finding solution to problem. So the example, the tale that you gave, so simple. I listen to you and I can imagine how many thousand times this happened, all around the world, that in the name of development, we lost social fabric, other ways of being that maybe last centuries, without compromising, the environment. We also know a lot of stories, that human have been not only industrial civilization, like land degradation and environmental degradation also were like a result of, non-industrial culture, misuse of the land, So there is a pattern, and this pattern, I think, is like accelerated to the extreme with the advent of the industrial society, 200 years ago. Then it was like an expansion of this. But the pattern, this is what we are talking about, this pattern of behavior and relationship to the earth, is really ancient. The crisis of meaning in Western society, I think, always lies also in the meaningless worldview. The world is stripped of meaning at all. We are here. It's a casual, like evolution is like this casual, random encounter of atoms and and genes and molecules, and the universe as well is explained in those terms. There is no meaning, there is no intelligence behind. This void is extreme. I mean, with this void, we are not able, to align ourselves with the purpose of life on the planet. The purpose of life is create more life. The purpose of life on the planet is complexify in order to give birth to more complex life forms. And we are the result of this. Human beings, we are the result of this inherent syntropy of life. Accumulating energy complexifies life form in order to fulfill more complex function. I believe in this story, that we are the result of this 4 billion years journey of life, of concentrating energy, complexifying, and this process gave birth to a species with a huge brain, capable of abstract thinking, of language, and then a huge gift of stewarding, creation.
To pitch in on this particular even example of my side of the world in the name of progress, I think even Nicolas have shared with you that there are some communities whereby, the Westerns and very good-hearted individuals, institutions come in and say, oh, there's an issue of running water. and they really want indoor plumbing within the communities when they see these communities going to maybe a well or a river to fetch water. But the funniest thing that I go to share with Nicolas, and I want to share right now, is that these wells, when they are built, the communities only use them for maybe 1 or 2 months. Then they go back to the river. Why? Because they find the river is the place of communion for them. If there's indoor plumbing, if I can switch on my tap and water is running, I don't need to go and meet the neighbor. I don't need to go and my neighbor's children to go play with their children. Everything is inside. So they get to realize, no, I need to connect. I need to go and meet so-and-so and meet my favorite auntie and get to talk and get to discuss motherhood and the community. And that's one of the things that some of them, they get to overlook that development. Okay, you brought a dam or maybe you brought a tap closer, but we are not closer. So sometimes they even take the inconvenient route. The main Westerners would say it's inconvenient, but it's the best way to live for them. So maybe I could just sharing that maybe an anecdote that when it comes to development and convenience and ease of life, for many communities here, the ease of life is connecting. If I can go out and get my facilities and get to meet Francesco and get to meet Nicolas, I don't want to stay at home. It doesn't matter if I can do it at home. I want to meet you. And that time is precious for me more than the inconvenience of going out and getting it.
Yeah, it's incredible when I hear these words with everything that I know about the world, having been many different places of the world, many cultures that are relational oriented and not task oriented, such as the Anglo-Saxon cultures. And in hearing your story, I can hear the foreignness to it, that if I center myself in the Western mindset, it's almost unbelievable to think that people can live and make their relationship more important than the production of goods, the outcome of their relationship. People get together to produce something in the Western Anglo-Saxon world. That something is more important than the relationship itself. As long as that something is produced, we don't really care who produced it. Mother, daughter, uncle, nephew, two strangers, we don't care. We don't care. But in Africa, you do. And in other countries also. But it's I don't know if you also, Francesco, can hear the foreignness to believe that there is a world where that relationship really does matter.
I think it's beautiful, simple tale that you brought, René. I mean, if yeah, as you said, from this like Western mind, which is used to this paradigm of efficiency. This is one of the highest value in Western society, efficiency. As you said, like task oriented. Fulfill the function. Would sound really strange what René brought. From the way we organize. In the village, and bring water to all the houses and stuff. Why are you choosing to spend more time and bring home less water? Like this doesn't make sense from a Western point of view, from a rational mindset. But and I mean we can share as well the awareness that efficiency itself is completely void. I mean, can bring us benefit from one side, but then we are left naked with we are left without such an basic thing for our life, which is relationship.
Why are relationship important?
It's such a basic question that you're asking. And I think that we, as a human beings, as an individual, we are the relationship that we hold. I mean, we can be defined from the relationship that we hold. I mean, I don't exist in isolation. Anything lives can exist in isolation. But human beings, because there are other species that live in a more isolated way, if you will. Some animals like just are born and then live their life until they mate, but basically live alone. We really do not, as basically, the vast majority of mammals, we live together with our groups. But I mean, we human beings are social beings, and we really are the relationship. What we think when the person that we become is the result of the relationship that we held throughout our lives with our environment, with our peers, with our families. That this is what makes us what we are. I think we are nothing without the relationship. And everything we become, everything we think, everything we do is the result of our journey of having relationship with the world around us. So there's a big pitfall, if you will, of Western mindset at the end of individualism, that we are actually, our life is defined by who we are independently from the relationship. I think this is somehow wrong. I mean, we are the relationship that we hold throughout our lives. This is what defines us.
And whether it's ideologically wrong or not, if we do take to its natural conclusion the idea of efficiency, what is most efficient so far in the realm of human environments is machines. And we can ask, how rich are machines of human life and meaning and experience and inner life? We have inner lives, right? We have things that differentiate us from machine. But the machine of Western thinking, the big macro machine that is organizing our lives in compartments at school, beginning from school, right? We're organizing these little industrial compartments on conveyor belts towards graduating somewhere, because that will get us into the next machine, which is the work machine, right? So in a way, much of our lives are organized as a machine on a production line, and from that we don't derive much relational wealth. We are disenchanted. We are emptied of love and meaning and connection. One of the biggest crises in the world today, in my field of psychology, one of the biggest crises driving mental illness is isolation. Now I'm thinking of efficiency. Can we easily come to the conclusion that efficiency naturally and logically takes us to isolation? What if machines are the most efficient thing, and that this is where we're going to become more and more machine-like? Doesn't it make logical sense to understand that we will become as isolated as a machine is to itself?
I really feel the point that you are making. If we lose humanity in this relationship, then we are completely in the hands of the machine, to use your words. So yeah, to sum up, I would say we need to tell us new stories that actually can empower us to revitalize what makes us human, which is relationship. And when we can be fully human, we can also be really positive towards our surroundings and the environment. Everything is connected. I mean, we can't be ecologically sound and zero impact or completely regenerative if we don't look at social relationship as well. We don't live in isolation. We can enclose ourselves in our ecological paradise, in our self-sustaining farm or whatever, but I do believe that actually self-sufficiency actually doesn't exist for humans. I mean, we always need to have relationship, if it's not material relationship, because you can produce everything you need, but you still need human relationship outside of your bubble, because that's what we are, our relationship. So
Before you move on to the more hopeful part of this talk, there is a few things that I want to do. One is I want to address our viewers again, and as we become more soulful about this topic, as we touch on sort of perhaps what is the wound, right? I kind of feel that we have come a little bit more closer to the wound of the earth and the wound of being a human on this earth today. I want to ask my viewers if they have stories of this kind, if they have seen their relationships changing because of the gentrification of their landscape, or because of the technologization of their landscape. So please do comment and let us know these stories, because they're going to be very informative as to how technology is disrupting human relationships and connection. And René, I'm going to come back to you now, because I know you have something to share about Nairobi in particular, that is around the topic of trash, if I understand well.
I live in Nairobi, Kenya, East Africa, in East African country. And this city is maybe one of the youngest cities that any of you have lived in. So far, it's been there for maybe less than 150 years. So it was actually from a colonial point of view. And this city, the planning was done mainly during that period of colonization. So they didn't really factor in when it comes to waste management, when it comes to planning. The only official dump site we have in Nairobi is called the Dandora dump site. And so far, it actually receives almost 2,000 to 2,500 tons of garbage daily. And it was supposed to be closed by the year 2001. It was established in 1975. It was supposed to be closed in 2001. It was filled by then. But now it's still operational because there hasn't been new planning since then. And unfortunately, only about 500 tons of that trash is recycled. The 500 tons really composes of the plastics and the glass that goes through recycling. The other 2,000 tons just stays there. And this really shows that the politics around waste management. First of all, the lack of planning of this city, because right now we are almost an excess of 6 million people. When it was planned, we were almost less than almost 200,000. Now we're almost like 6 million people, contributing about 2,500 tons of waste daily. It's really an issue that we're getting to deal with. And I just wanted to share with Nicolas and Francesco and the viewers of this part of the world, how do you actually deal with the waste and maybe the lack of planning and the kind of waste we get to deal with and get to throw away in our own particular communities. So this is the Dandora dump site. Actually, it was established in 1975 as the only official dump site of the Nairobi city. Now, Nairobi is the capital city and is home to almost 6 million people. So all our waste has been going to that dumping site since 1975. And from our population growth, right now, the dumping is almost 2,500 tons of waste that is dumped there every day. So that's about almost like a truck or a car that is dumped there every day since 1975. And only 20%, which is about 500 tons, is recycled. So maybe the tires are only recycled back to during the waste management systems that we have that really need updating. So they have never been updated since ideally 2001, which ideally this dumping site should have closed down. It was already full by then, but still is in operation 24 years later. So in this whole system of dealing with this waste, which most of this waste comprises of organic waste, the leftover food, leftover agricultural issues, and mainly the plastics, which are now recycled. The other things that are not recycled are some of the metals and other objects. So there are certain individuals who work in that site, almost like about 1,500 individuals who work on that dumping site to do that recycling process, picking out the recyclable materials. And so far, some of them have been working there for almost 15 years, almost 20 years, and some of them are very young. They also bring their children to work there. Some of them earn as little as maybe $1, $2, $3 per day from recycling these cans, because they have to fill in a sack. And the sack is about 6 kilos of plastics. So they get about $3, $4 for that 6 kilos of plastic, recycling it. So ideally, I just wanted to share, this is the situation that is here as we are trying to deal with population growth. A city that was, the initial planning was about for 200,000. Now we are almost 6 million people. The consumption has almost quadrupled by almost like a few thousand%. And now we're getting to have systems and the politics around these systems to really help us deal with our own waste and manage it.
I can imagine a lot of sort of repercussions of this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, there's a research done that mostly there's been a couple of increase of certain health issues that are caused by lead. Like most of the children there have a very high lead, maybe capacity or consumption of lead. So these metals that the trash bring in, and also with the smoke, in the video you can see there's a lot of smoke and the fumes. There's a lot of lead concentration in the atmosphere, and it's really affected people when it comes to respiratory issues. It's a lot of a big thing there. And also just general sanitation issues. So these are two areas that really has been polluting, especially when it comes to lead and other metals, have really polluted that particular environment from the constant fumes that have been burning almost throughout ever since it has been filled up.
So we can see here, for example, in this story, how efficiency translates into toxicity, right? Concentrated toxicity, because that's another sort of, Francesco, maybe you want to comment on this, but it's sort of another side effect of the massive efforts that we make to keep things clean, with all these thousands of products and machines that we employ to keep things clean. But actually, we just kind of put a lot of these things that we don't think are clean in concentrated environments that then go on to pollute the waterways, the seas, the land, of course, and then the people that live around there, and then the relationships, because of course there are children with leukemia, oftentimes where there's a lot of lead concentration, child develop cancer, and so there are children dying in these families, and here we are talking again about the way that we connect and the way also that we build our sense of selves, right? If I am a mother that is growing 3 children, 2 of them die to leukemia, that's different than the 3 of them thriving and becoming, high school teachers or whatever they want to become, right?
Garbage is like this side effect, which is considered inevitable in order for consumption to go on. So we have an economy built on consumption. We have a paradigm that pushes us, to consume more, because the economy grows if people consume more. And then, garbage is the inevitable, unavoidable result of consumption. Everything you buy comes in plastic. So, even if you really want to be like plastic free, it's basically impossible, unless you make a really, really like radical decision, but this like just a few examples, like humanity produces garbage because in order for living, you need to buy at least something, in the city, you buy everything basically. And so this is like a huge elephant in the room. We accept these pills, this like we sacrifice part of the landscape, we pollute part of the landscape, we really sacrifice part of the landscape in order for the machine to go. So this is a clear example of how, we always externalize our action. Always, we think that we have no impact in something, but impact is simply externalized, down the chain, and garbage is like this huge, huge things that we don't really see because we are not shown images very often of landfills, and dump fields. And I was watching those images, and it is like crazy, and that garbage production never stops. It can't stop because production can't stop. So is this like feedback loop which is reinforcing, and it seems that it can actually stop, and we as people can't actually stop buying the things that we need, so we find ourselves trapped and feeding this same system, destructive system, so thank you for bringing this example in order to take awareness of the magnitude, and the intrinsic problem that we have, in this. And the solution is not so easy. It's not from one day to another, it's like rethinking, basically everything. But it's really important to highlight, the effect, as you said, Nicolas, of and the echoes of this impact, and not only on the environment, which is the most direct effect, but on the people as well.
There is one example that I want to bring to the table. There are a couple, actually. I think they're very interesting. I'm not sure if we have the time for both. But one of them concerns the fact that this little village where I live, which until the year 2000 was a little village very remote in Bulgaria that only had about 10,000 people in it. And they were mostly pastoral farmers, sort of either herding sheep and cow or farming the land here. And then in 2000, some English company came and they appropriated themselves of part of the national park, or rather sort of started to rent on a permanent basis the national park, and they created a ski resort, and a lot of ski tourism started to come. And ski tourists are not particularly good at keeping their trash with them. So a lot of trash is thrown all around the snow. And when this snow melts, it goes into the local river. And so you can see, because during the winter, the river is at its lowest, right? So you can actually see the trash in the river. And then when the spring comes, the river really climbs a few meters, an incredible amount of water rushes down, and it just collects all that trash and brings it to the bigger rivers and eventually to the sea. So that's one thing. But an even more insidious one is that to maintain the ski resort, the company has invested very heavily into buying snowmaking cannons. But this snow, even though it uses a lot of the water from the mountain, it also uses a freezing agent. A freezing agent is basically a petrochemical agent, basically the opposite chemical compound that the antifreeze that you use in your car if you live in a very cold place, to not make the water freeze in your car. The opposite compound makes the water freeze more quickly. So they pump this petrochemical product into the cannons. The cannons make the snow. By the end of the season, most of the snow is cannon-made snow. And where do you think that those petrochemicals go at the end of the season? They go into the land. They go into the aquifers below the ground. They go into the river. They go to the sea. So now we know that both petrochemicals and plastics are reaching the sea in large quantities. We also know that around the world there are about 5 mega huge big washing machines for plastic, and that these big washing machines, they disintegrate the plastic into microplastics. So you know how we talk a lot about microplastics today. If you buy a microplastic little towel that you maybe wipe the kitchen with, right, on a daily basis, when you put it in a washing machine, those microplastic lose a lot of microplastic little towels. They lose a lot of microplastics. Right? There are certain devices today that you can fit on the washing machine that capture those microplastics, but then we have no way of actually getting rid of them properly. So I don't know why you would do that. But that's those things that you would capture with that filter. is the same thing that you get in the sea eventually with every piece of plastic, no matter how large or small that it is, that we put into the sea. So whether we put the bumper of a car into the sea or a plastic bag, your casual normal plastic bag, all of them will eventually decompose into microplastics. We now know from research that those microplastics, when you look at them at the microscopic level, they are like little hooks. And what they particularly like to hook on is these petrochemical compounds. So now we have microplastics with petrochemical compounds that enter the food chain through fish, and enter the reproductive systems of the fish, and eventually enter the body of the people who rely mostly on these fish. So research has been made on fish relying villages, cultures, for example, like along the coastline of, let's say, Indonesia or Thailand or the Philippines. So people, where there are a lot of people, millions of people who still rely very much on local products and mostly fish. Well, there is research showing that the fertility rate is significantly lower for males in those communities, and that the ovarian uterus cancers rates are significantly higher. And the reason for that is precisely the contamination of these pollutants that we're talking about that has entered the food chain of fish on which they rely. So again, we come back through this huge cycle to realize that everything that, our actions, the actions that we take in the world, eventually end up in human wounds. And those human wounds, of course, I saw you breathing heavily there, Francesco. That's grief, right? That's the wound that is touching you, isn't it? What is there for you? What is making you breathe?
Yeah, exactly. This makes me sad, like, and then realizing once again the magnitude of these issues, like, and what I said before, actually, and then understanding how these processes are critically part of the system which we live. We are talking about microplastics, but these are the end result, of the entire chain of production, consumption, and then like disposal that makes human sustainability in or that makes millions of people living, and these are the end results, and we are part of this. So my grief sits upon realizing how big this is and how part it is. It's not just a bad behavior out there, of some like unconscious people. This is what is happening in order for millions of people to live and survive. So, and and sometimes like I find myself like living, like experiencing this grief, and then I recognize a kind of hopelessness or disempowerment, which in the moment that I recognize, I tell myself, I think, okay, this is actually true, this is actually happening, but this like at a certain point I need to keep thinking about this, like exploring, investigating, like what I need is hopeful energy and positive energy, so like this is, and I would like to link back to the start of the conversation, those academic years that we shared, that we talked a lot about these kind of things, right? You remember, a lot of case studies, a lot of environmental issues, so I realized that, okay, this is important to be aware, we can't live in a bubble, but if this awareness of the problems actually enables me of taking action, I need to step back from this. I need to step into hopeful stories, hopeful, empowering information, and skills in order to, to take action. Part of the this feeling of unease and uncomfortable that I felt at some point was, okay, like I can be drawn, into this despair, because environmental issues, social issues are so massive and seems to be so hard and impossible to solve, that this doesn't make any sense that people feel, disempowered and just keep on tracks on their individualism. So I needed to break this, I needed to break not only from the dominant story, that tells me that I need to study, to work, to produce, to make a living, no matter what, but also trying to step out the focus on problem, and just working for spreading the awareness that we are, doomed and a lot of problems, like focus my energy on what we can do in our little sphere of influence, starting from our lives, in order to change those patterns, starting to have a little bit of positive impact, and anchor firmly on those stories. I truly believe that if we would share as a society, as a media, if we would share empowering stories more and more, we could see a lot of more positive things happening, but now that's another conversation, that why are we fed so much with, negative, this is how, mainstream media actually works, you need to.
It's true, and I'm sorry to sort of sort of feed this conversation in this way. On the one hand, I think it's important for us to feel sad, to go to the sadness place, because as you said, otherwise we just try to deny what's happening, right? Also, the story that I just told about the plastic shows us how the system works. And without these things being shown, we don't understand how they're all interrelated, how everything is relationship. And everything in this little blue rock that we are is connected, right? So, and there is some educational sort of lessons to take out of these negative stories. But I agree with you, and I love these channels or companies. One of them I really like is called Ren, and they publish, good stories. There is also there is an Instagram account. I think it's called. I'll remember later. We'll edit today, but there is an Instagram account that focuses on good stories, and it really makes me feel good to see what we are achieving. So that's also very, very important. And on your side, Francesco, I know that you are actually doing things. You stepped into a new kind of living, one that was kind of uncommon to even your family background. And I love to hear. I love to hear more about it.
Yeah, and from all of this, awareness, taking moment and reflection, and if you will, like crisis, and then, rebirth, you would say. And yeah, what I do today is, completely different from what I've done for the first 25 years of my life. And yeah, and a certain point of my existence, I felt the urgent need to gain practical skills, hands-on skills, or taking responsibility of my life first, and then I was introduced to permaculture design, and how we can think about our lives and the places we inhabit, and take responsibility of the things we need. So my entry point was natural building, which is something that I still do today as part of my profession. Part of the jobs that I do sometimes involves, carpentry and, like framing and sewage. I work a lot with water management at different scales, from household scales, sewage treatment to plumbing, but also bigger scale, like water retention, like working with machinery. Like water is really like a passion of mine. But yeah, so I basically started like educating myself and gaining skills on how to work, with tools, how to work with materials, and how to have like a material impact, on the spaces that we inhabit. And so I work as well as consultant. Sometimes people reach to me and contract me, in order to help them design in their space. They have goals, and they need guidance in order to make decision to reach their goals. Where should I place some structure? Where do I get the water I need? Where should I plant? Where should an access road goes on the landscape? It's like landscape design in some sense, and then implementation of project. And this is, for my personal story, certainly something, I wouldn't say strange, but something new, in the sense that, I was born and I grew up in a city from, a middle class family. And both my parents went to university. They worked all their life as a professional in the field they studied. They graduated. So I was born. I grew up, with this pathway already, delineated for me. After high school, go to university, graduate, and then, try to find a good work with what you studied. It was like an investment. The family invests in the future of their son, and they enable them, to study. I was privileged. I could, for the first part of my academic career, I didn't have to work. I could focus on my study, Then, for example, in Sweden, I started, working in order to sustain myself during my studies. So for certainly I was privileged in that sense that I could invest, in studying a lot. But then at a certain moment, I decided that, academia was not for me, even if it was, like, as I said, a great experience and really rich years for me. And then I decided, to open my life to new possibilities. And then I started this new journey of learning completely new things completely new for me in terms of practical experience. But I can recognize that, I was growing this interest in these skills, which for some years were accomplished, by like reading books, watching videos, trying to, feed myself with this information, up to a point where, I clearly felt the need of doing things, because we can learn a lot from, reading and, like intellectually, but like the experience and the knowledge that you gain from using these are like learning organs, they're not just means of like doing things, that's learning receivers, when you do things with your hands. I truly believe in this, and I experience this every day. I've been asked to counsel another job site where they have to, put in place some sewage treatment system, but every context is unique, so every solution needs to be adapted to the context. So I will go there tomorrow, meet the client, and then see what are the possibilities, what are their goals, and then design this system and hopefully, implement the construction of this system, which a lot of times involves like a wetland, artificial wetland, which is kind of a basin when you derive your sewage and then you treat them. So you consume the nutrients through plants, and then you have treated water on the outlet, which you can use to, irrigate trees. You can let the water, infiltrate directly into the ground, and go to a creek or whatever. So like the nature-based solution for treating water that we inevitably when we use, at domestic level, we pollute water. But we have, this simple technology based on, nature photosynthesis and microbial activity, which is as old as, as life, basically. And we can use this kind of solutions, and then most of the time in parallel of this job site work, as I would say, I do some, I work sometimes as a designer, as I mentioned, I work, at the landscape level, and then sometimes I'm working in project, when we need to design human habitats, places, infrastructure, and connecting all the elements together in order to meet the goals of the people, but at the same time, not only not damaging the ecosystem processes that are in place, but trying to be like fostering these processes.
And so at the end of your work, we get a cleaner output from human activities, and we get some level of regeneration. I know that Uruguay is doing very well in terms of its economy remaining within the bounds of what it, more or less, what it can afford to extract from its nation.
It seems to be that, talking about Uruguay, where I live, that the way people in Uruguay live, it takes almost a complete year, of earth resources to stay in the way of living that we have. And so from that graph that you can probably share, with the audience later in the footnote of the video, we see all the countries in the world, and that there are countries that after a few days, they already have consumed, if all the people on the planet lived like certain country, all the resources of the planet would end in a few days. And then actually Uruguay is at the other end. So if all the people on the planet lived as people in Uruguay, the earth could actually almost regenerate all its resources.
Yeah. So this comes back to the idea that ultimately the earth is a limited resource, right? And our Western philosophy argue for infinite growth. So, like, how can you have infinite growth on a finite level of resource? So this graph emerges from that. And so it means that, for example, at the level of consumption of the USA, within a week or so, the USA has already consumed all its budget of resources on the land that it inhabits, right? Another way of thinking about this is that I know that what USA's, well, actually most big chain supermarkets, but what supermarkets stock in their supermarkets, if we think in these terms, in terms of the amount of resources that humans should consume so that the earth can regenerate itself, what we're stocking today in the supermarkets is the food of our grandchildren. So we are consuming the food of our grandchildren in most of these developed countries. And I would imagine then that in Uruguay, what is stocked in the supermarkets is actually the food that you can afford to eat. Like that your generation can afford to eat, because you're so close to the end of the year. I think it's like the 27th of December or something. So that's also another way of understanding this. Um, uh, Francesco, I know that you built your own house, your own first house, and then you built your own second house, and now you're moving to this other second house. What happened?
I built my first house when my first daughter was born. So it was basically out of necessity because we didn't have a place. I mean, we were like moving from place to place, during the pregnancy. And then, we realized that from the resources that we have, the best choice that we could take was to build our own house, which is a little cabin, really small. So we actually say, okay, with this money, what can we do? What way can we build? And we built a really small cabin. Our house is 25 square meters, our first house, and we are 4.
Wow.
So you can imagine, like minimal living, in a tiny house, and which was a great experience. I mean, everything that we have done and all the decisions we have made, it's like have taught us so many things. But then we had the opportunity to go to a bigger plot of land and build like a bigger house where we can receive our families as well, the grandparents, brothers and sisters that we have. And so we could actually build like a more family-like house. And that's the place where we are moving. Actually, in these days, we are in the midst of moving from one place to another. We are not, we are living physically this place, but we are not selling this place. We are actually maintaining this. Some friends are coming in to take care, so it's like taking another step and start learning this new adventure of, producing food, working with animals, and in this awareness of, as I mentioned before, I don't aim to be in a self-sufficient farm, I want to produce food for my family and for my community as well, trying to have some produce that, people need that I can exchange, and trying to, I think one of my strongest value that I hold is integrity, trying to be as in line as I can with what I believe. What we think with our project is that we could fulfill the need of producing food from the community, and we will be dependent on other people for other things, So the aim is not trying to produce everything, this dream of self-sufficiency, which is, I think, kind of unachievable nowadays, but like self-reliance, which is different from self-sufficiency. Self-reliance is in interconnection and interdependence. Because if not interdependent with you, Nicolas, I don't need you. So why should we have a relationship? But I want to be interdependent with others, and maintain this human relationship that we talk about, which is so important, that René also shared with his story, maintain this kind of relationship, and every one of us trying to participate, to meet the needs of the community. That's my, ideal.
Yeah, I mean, you touch again on something that is almost seen as the devil in capitalist individualistic societies. Dependency is like almost a swear word.
Yeah.
So it's like a taboo. We shouldn't ever talk about the the positives of dependency. What are you talking about? But here you are wanting to re-inject your life and the life of the relationships they entertain with a sense of positive dependency on one another, because in the long term, that dependency is the glue to more stable relationship, and more stable relationships bring more stable families, economies, more stable economies. More stable economies have more stable material wealth, have more stable families again. So back into the cycle, right? So you want to, I guess, you want to interact with part of the human psychology that is less um, flimsy and on the whim than just wants and desires, right? To depend on somebody is more than, oh, I like that person, and then the day after, oh, I don't like them anymore, right? When you depend on someone, you have to kind of walk around your likes and dislikes, right?
Yeah. I mean, when you depend on someone, you have community actually. If you don't, if you're independent, you don't need anybody, you can't have community. Community exists when, people need each other. And so they actually form a community. A community exists when needs of the group are met by all of the people that are part of the group. If every, as you said, in our modern society, like dependency is like a negative thing. It's like a weak link, in our pathway, to ascending socially, you don't need anybody. You should, like be totally self-sufficient, not depending on anybody, have enough financial wealth, in order to fulfill all your needs, no matter
Completely detached, should be emotionally completely detached, materially completely independent.
totally. And so this is an illusion. I mean, this is an illusion because when we have all this wealth and all the possibility of purchasing and fulfilling these needs by the use of money, as we said before, we are left completely spoiled of the unmaterial thing that nourishes us. So it's an illusion to deny that we are totally no dependent and autonomous being. That's the other core belief, individualism, autonomy, autonomous being, and that's what we are taught in school since we are kids, like gain your knowledge, find your way, your ways of, your place in society, your wealth, your life, your career, everything. So this actually disrupts the community. Community exists when people rely on each other. There's no other way, So
Imagine if at school every A grade could only be achieved. Imagine if A's were only given when the students find a way to make everybody collaborate on a certain outcome, right? If you cannot include everybody in that outcome, then you get less than A.
well, that could be an interesting experiment of a new educational paradigm, I would say, like trying to reward the common good and reward those abilities and skills that then can actually make what is common to thrive.
So you are very much someone who knows a lot about sort of ecological ways of building things, of capturing water. If someone is in the area of South America or Uruguay, or even just wants to have a Zoom call with you to consult about their own project, how can they reach you? And can they actually?
So I think the easiest way to contact me is can be by email, which I can share with you, and you can share. I have no problem. I have like an Instagram account where I share the work I do, which of course can be a channel. I have a LinkedIn page as well.
Okay, both René and I want to thank you immensely for having participated in this conversation and this project at large. And we wish you all the best.
I'm really happy for what you're doing, for the job you're doing in sharing this kind of conversation. So keep it up, the good work, and hope to meet you soon again.
Thank you. For those who are listening, please put your comments down there, what you thought about this conversation, and especially highlight the links that are in your life between your own personal wounds and suffering and the suffering that the environment is going through in and of itself. Until next time, see you and take care. Bye bye.